Good afternoon. Welcome to this session on the art and science of pricing, and I think that's a pretty good title for it, for this absorbing topic, because although pricing may be rooted in economics, there are many more variables than that we have to consider. So what makes a well-chosen price? Obviously, price needs to achieve the financial goals of the company, for instance, its obvious contribution to profitability. It must fit the realities of your marketplace. Will customers actually buy at the price you set? And it must, of course, support the product's own positioning. And ideally, you want to feel okay about your pricing. In fact, you even want to feel good about your pricing. And so pricing is so much more than just a tactical exercise that facilitates the exchange of goods and services. Now, pricing feels as if it should be an external facing activity. It's all about the market, right? But actually, it's an internal process. We need to be strategic in setting our prices and link our strategies to our values, our missions, and our community. What does your pricing say about your organization? How does pricing interact with your community entanglement? We all know how we feel about a price when it's our own cash leaving our pocketbooks. We know that warm feeling when the price is absolutely right. It resonates with us. But we also know that feeling when we think a price is obviously exorbitant, and even worse if the actual sum, even small, like a $2.50 cup of coffee, feels wrong because the coffee is undrinkable. That's a bad feeling with price. So although we set up today's session as a bit of a debate, it's really a conversation about two different approaches, and of course they're not mutually exclusive. These are not opposing philosophies. One approach is not necessarily better than the other. It is all about what works for you and your market, and as we're very fond of saying at the League, everything is local. Well, we have two speakers today who have forgotten more about this subject than most of us will ever know, and they're going to look at two varying ways and different ways of pricing. Jack McAuliffe, who needs no introduction to many of you, formerly in Washington at the Kennedy Center at the League for many years, president now of Engaged Audiences. Jack's going to kick off in a moment, and he'll be followed by Jon Limbacher, the Chief Operating Officer at the Saint Paul Chamber Orchestra. So, gentlemen, let's get ready to have our conversation. Jack, over to you.
Thank you very much, Russell. John, when we first talked about this, we were going to do it in a cage with no gloves or anything, and then we went to a ring with gloves, and then we went to a presidential debate for a while where we had lecterns and things behind us, and now we've got comfy chairs, and it's a discussion, and it's getting better every minute. Speaking of chairs, I'm told that Rick Lester from TRG, who does some very powerful seminars on pricing, usually begins those seminars by taking a chair and plonking it down enough to wake people up, and then saying, "What's that chair worth?" And that's really an awfully good question to ask to get started on it, because that chair has at least two different kinds of values to it. It has some logistical and some structural, that's a pretty comfy chair there. This one's worth more than that one is. Clearly that one is worth more than this one is because you're sitting in it and you're not sitting down here. Okay, so there are attributes in terms of comfort. If there are wider chairs rather than narrow ones on the airplane, those wider ones have more value. There's questions of location. If you're closer to the stage or further from it or behind a pillar, those have factors to it. How scarce it is. If there's only a few of them left, is it worth more than if there are a whole bunch of them? So it has circumstantial or locational values to it, and you need to price to those values, and that's called scaling. So you price your house based on what the relative seats are worth. But you also have value to the customer. If I ask you how much this seat's worth, you're going to give me a different price than if I ask you how much that seat's worth. That might depend on how tired you are and how long this week has been. that seat might be a lot more valuable to you than to someone else. It may be if you like to really hear the basses, a seat over on that side's more valuable than a seat over on this side is. Or if you want to be a little further back to get better balance, that's better than up front. But those are personal tastes. Those aren't the value of the seat per se. And over time, I found that those personal tastes have a lot to do with familiarity. And those of you that have heard me talk about the recent research and the audience motivation research, which identified the frequency spiral, which told us that familiarity drives enjoyment, drives frequency, drives familiarity. The more familiar you are, the more you're going to value that seat. And that seat now is not a chair, but it's an experience. Okay, so how much do you value that experience? You'll pay more for an experience you value higher than less. Then we went from the audience motivation to the churn study, where the churn study showed us that we could encourage frequency of attendance over time by getting people to come more frequently in the short run. And the most powerful lever we had to get people to come more frequently was price. So if we use pricing to encourage frequency, once we establish that frequency, which has established the familiarity, then that price isn't as important anymore, and it can begin to rise. And now recently, if you heard yesterday's and today's presentations about the Patron Growth Initiative, we find that familiarity not only drives attendance, but it also drives contributions. So whatever we can do to drive familiarity through pricing is valuable to do. And so that's why at Engage Audiences we came up with the title of Familiarity Pricing as a title to describe this philosophy of using price strategically to build familiarity and frequency. Because the research has showed us and practice has proven that when pricing drives frequency, frequency drives familiarity, familiarity drives enjoyment, and enjoyment drives engagement and revenue. So there are three pieces to the familiarity pricing approach, which is a strategy, not just individual tactics. A lot of you have used some of the tactics. A lot of you have done onboarding after you heard the churn study from Oliver Wyman. The onboarding is using a discounted price and an early offer to get people to come back for a second concert after they've attended the first. A lot of you use a deep discount, introductory discount to first-time subscribers to get them to make the commitment to subscribe. Okay, those are both strong tactics in my mind, and I've seen people do very good audience growth through using them. But I like looking at them as part of an overall strategy, which I'm referring to as familiarity pricing. The first aspect of familiarity pricing is to set a fair individual concert price by day, location, series. The second is to discount publicly to prompt frequency. So discount to get somebody to come back for another concert, discount to get people to buy multiple concerts at the same time, either through a pick 2 or a pick 3 or a choose your own offer, or through a traditional subscription for the first time. And then don't forget about the last piece of pricing, which is demand pricing. If, in fact, the hall is starting to fill up and there's only a few seats left down here, what might have been a $25 seat yesterday may be a $35 seat today. And you might as well pick up that extra 10 bucks a seat if you know it's going to sell out. And demand price only up, don't demand price down. Discount down to encourage frequency, demand price up to take advantage of scarcity. Okay, so 5 steps in the familiarity pricing approach. First step is scaling. You've got to get the price of that chair right to begin with. One of the best ways I've found to scale correctly is to figure out how in demand that seat is over your season. So look at the last season. And I would rescale maybe every 3 to 5 years. really reset where the relationship of prices here to prices there over every 3 years, 3 to 5 years. So take a look at your attendance over the last year. And you can actually put on each seat in the house, if you're really into data like that, a percentage of the time that seat was sold. So this seat here may have been sold 90% of the time, that one 35%, that one 16%, that one 100%. You can actually do that and then take a chart of the hall and color code in all the seats that were sold more than 85% of the time. Code those green. And then go through and take all the seats that were sold less than 25% of the time and code those red. And when you look at that, you're going to realize from a heat chart that there's a pattern to where the green seats are. They're all underpriced. Those seats are in such demand that you could have gotten more for them because they're constantly sold out at the price you've got. The seats that were red, the cool seats, not cool and attractive, but cool and volume, those seats are overpriced. People are not willing to pay the price you've got for them. They'll sit somewhere else or they'll stay home. If you price that way, and of course you're not going to price on a seat-by-seat basis, you're going to sort of squint when you look at it, and maybe change where your price zones are because the seats just outside the zone are selling better than the seats in it. Maybe you raise a whole zone more than another zone because that zone is always filled out. So the first thing is scaling. And the second piece of it is annual increases in prices. Over time, you almost have to increase every year to keep up with inflation, or you're going to get behind and have to make a big increase every year. I used to say that adamantly, without exception, and that was before I went through the last 2 or 3 years of the economy. Sometimes with the economy, you have to say, hold on a while here, we're going to stick with our prices as they are, and when things come back a little more to normal, then we'll start going up again. But you can rescale every 3 to 5 years. You raise the whole level with the economy when the economy allows you to. First step is then get the prices right. Second step is to get people to come back. Use pricing for onboarding. So anybody who is at their first concert, you want to be in touch with them immediately after that concert, invite them back for another one at half off, some sort of deep discount. The Oliver Wyman study showed that a 50% discount was much more valuable in bringing people back than a 25% discount. It's not about the money at that point. It's about establishing that familiarity and that relationship. Get them back into that seat a second time. Oliver Wyman's study showed that people who attended one concert in a year, the likelihood of them coming back the next season was 10%. If they came to 2 or 3 concerts in the year, the likelihood of coming back the next season was 50%. I've also found in practice that people who attend one concert in a year, 3 to 4% of those will subscribe in the following season. People who have attended 2 to 3 concerts in a year that have been onboarded or otherwise brought into that second or third concert, I've seen as much as 20 to 30% of those people subscribe in the next season with the right offer. So using discounting to get people to a second performance is a powerful tactic in the strategy of familiarity pricing. You can also do that by encouraging a multiple sale right off the bat. You don't have to have them just buy one. If they buy 2 tickets, 2 concerts right off the bat, you've already onboarded them for the second concert. So something like a pick 2 offer or a choose your own or a very short series, deeply discounted, can in fact start building that familiarity just as much as onboarding with a little less work. Then we have to move to the next step, which is nurturing. And very quickly, it moves from being all about the price to being all about the music. Because people will come for the price, but they come back for the music. So if you can get them familiar and hooked on the music, then all of a sudden the value of that evening goes up in their mind and they're willing to pay more. So the minute you start bringing them in with price, you now want to nurture them onto the music. So the third step, scaling, onboarding, nurturing. And the nurturing is somehow providing a wonderful performance of a fantastically programmed evening that just blows them away. But also, you may need to go beyond that with people early in their life cycle with you and offer them some context. So both marketing the music so that you're not just selling a date, a time, and a composer, but you're giving a little information about what that concert's about and what you might experience about it. The brief comments from the stage about an unfamiliar work that provides context to those people who are new and actually is attractive to people who are more established and more familiar. And then even, and now that technology is allowing us to do this better, allowing your music director or other artistic leader to share his or her insight with your audience in advance. I'm not talking just program notes here. 10 years ago, I would have recommended send a postcard to everybody on your list with the music director giving a couple of sentences about, here's why I put these 3 pieces on this program. Let them in on why it's structured that way. What's the relationship between the overture and the symphony or the concerto or whatever the piece is? Why do these fit together? What's the shape of this evening? It's very hard to get your music director to do that in 100 words. She'll usually give you 6 or 7 pages on it, and you can pull it down to the 100 words because your potential audience member isn't going to read 6 pages. But they'll really appreciate being let in on it with a few 100 words, a couple of sentences. And then a second paragraph that's a couple of sentences on, here's something to listen for in the concert. That's not program notes on every work. That's just, in the second movement of the Dvorak Cello Concerto, there's this wonderful melody that's based on a Czech folk song. And it'll sound like a folk song. You'll hear that when it's played. If you give people something to listen for in the concert, they'll listen harder during the whole concert. You can see them as you're sitting there or standing back at the back of the hall and you come to that part that you were talking about and you see. Because that was the part they were listening for. But they enjoyed it so much more because they were listening. So we moved from getting the price of the seat right to getting people to come back more frequently through a deep discount to nurturing them to moving from being price or economy driven to being music driven, and then moving them from that introductory approach to a subscription commitment, whether that subscription is a choose your own or a traditional full season or whatever you have. Use price to move them into that committed relationship with the orchestra. So I really recommend for classical seasons, depending on the market and how much of capacity you have sold, as much as a 50% discount to new subscribers. It's interesting, I know a lot of people have been talking about doing this and doing this over the years, but as I looked at all the brochures out in the hallway that were in the contest for best brochure, do you know what percentage of those brochures in the contest on the cover say first-time subscribers save 50%? One of them. Okay? If that's the purpose of that discount is a 2x4 to hit people over the head to say, you might try this, open this up and look at it. Those brochures, for the most part, are dependent on your being familiar with the music to open it up and look at it. You need a little more power from that discount to open it up. But the first-timer discount has got to be for first-timers. Once you've come that first season, when it's time to renew, you gotta up the ante at this point. So I recommend a moderate discount for people renewing for the first time, which are called freshmen. Maybe 30% if you've offered 50 in the first year. And then by the time they renew for the second time, I'm talking about a 10% discount. The established subscriber who's been with you a couple years now has now gotten to the point where they're familiar enough and value the music enough that they're willing to pay close to full price for the quality seat they're sitting in. And you see renewal rates of freshmen, first-time renewers, of somewhere in 40 to 50%. Sophomores, people coming back for the second time, 70 to 75%, and then your established subscriber coming back at 85 to 95%. Okay? Price encourages that to happen at higher percentages. And if you can get people into the sophomore and the junior tenure with you, you have them for life. And not only that, you have bigger gifts from them. The last piece is now added to that support. And I have to put in one piece that sort of precedes all this, and that's awareness. One of the findings of the patron growth study that we didn't talk about in the presentation yesterday was we asked people whether the orchestra was a not-for-profit or a for-profit. And excluding the first-time people, everybody else that had a little more relationship with us, 20% of those people thought we were for-profit. And another 20% had no idea. So it was less than 60% of those customers, some of which have been with us forever and some of which have been with us several years, knew that we were a nonprofit and that gifts were important. Now, if I'd asked that same question about National Public Radio, what percentage of people would be ambivalent about there being a nonprofit or ambivalent about not knowing? You know, every hour they tell you they're a nonprofit. This program is brought to you by viewers like you. We maybe need to look at incorporating some of that awareness into our messaging, into our branding, so that people understand that this is an organization that runs on both ticket price and on contributions. Then, once we've got that awareness out there, I recommend not making an ask for a gift in the first year of the relationship with us. Right now, price is too important to them. They're not familiar enough yet. They don't value it beyond what they're doing. Don't ask them. You might provide a blank for them to put a gift in there, but don't ask for a gift during that first year of the relationship. In the second year of the relationship, you might make a soft ask for a gift. Many of your fellow attenders support the orchestra so that we can keep ticket prices down. We'd love to have a gift from you. Gift in any amount would be fine. In the third year of the relationship, the fourth year of the relationship, you start making a suggested ask. You know, something like $400 would be a nice gift. And you might base that amount on the size of their subscription or how much money you know they have, depending on the city you're in and how well you know them. So the last piece of it is the development piece that builds on the familiarity that you've established in the other three pieces. So familiarity pricing is a strategy that moves from the right price on the seat to begin with, moves to bringing people back with an onboarding discount, nurturing them with music interesting about the music, subscribing them at a deep but declining discount, and then asking for the gift at the right time.
Thank you, Jack. So hold your questions for Jack for a moment, because we're going to throw this open for everyone to make some comments after we've heard from Jon about what has become known as the Saint Paul model. Jon.
Since you wouldn't come closer to us, I'm going to come closer to you. I'm going to deviate a little bit from my remarks just to ask a question. How many people here, as you think about our industry, our music, how many of you think that audience is one of the really big issues for this field? Anybody who doesn't? Anyone who thinks audience not that important? Anyone not worried about audience right now? Know of data, aggregate data that you can show us that says don't worry about it, the trends are really good? I mean, right, we're all worried about it, aren't we? It's one of the big issues. Anyone not believe audience is an existential issue, that if there's not an audience for what we do, what's the point, right? Would we all kind of agree on that? I mean, it doesn't matter how much money we have if in fact there's no audience. So it is an existential issue. And the Saint Paul model really came about 6 years ago. And we were at the crossroads. We were at the crossroads. Were we a quasi-commercial product in need of subsidy because the business model didn't quite work? Or were we a cause deserving subsidy because we were adding so much in the way of public good in our community? I think that's really where we were from 6 years ago, at a crossroads. And we made the decision that we wanted to be a cause, that we wanted to contribute more to the public good, not in 1 year, but over time. And that if we contributed more to the public good, that we would be able to raise the money we needed to raise to be strong financially, that we'd be true to our mission, and we would be solid from a business model standpoint. And so what did we do? 6 years ago, if you think about it sort of as a before and after, we approached pricing not maybe as sophisticated in a sophisticated way as Jack described, but in a traditional way. The idea was we would get as much out of ticket sales as we could, and then we'd try to raise the rest of the money. And maybe even at some level we said to ourselves, if we could just sell more higher priced tickets, then we wouldn't have to raise so much money. But it was a traditional model. And so if you think of it as a before and after picture, in the before, about 35% of our tickets were available for $25 or less. The rest were more than that. And after lowering prices in a series of moves over time, now today, 84% of our tickets are available for $25 or less. 56 are available for $10. So we've gone from 35% at 25 or less to today, 84%, 56 at $10. So why did we do it? What was the reasoning other than we were at the crossroads? What was sort of the underlying rationale? First of all, we believe that affordability is fundamental to mission. Why do we exist? What's the point of existing? We exist, my orchestra and probably all of your orchestras, to enrich the lives of the people in our community. That's why people give the Saint Paul Chamber Orchestra $7 million a year. We're here to enrich lives. Our job is to eliminate all the barriers that exist that prevent us from not enriching more lives. That's our mission. That's the essence of our mission. To eliminate those is a barrier for some people, whether it's to come the first time or frequency. It's clearly a barrier. If price wasn't a barrier, would any of us ever discount? Probably not, right? I mean, there would be no need to. It's a barrier. So first of all, we lowered prices because we believe that affordability is fundamental to our mission as an organization. We also think it's fundamental to our business model because we believe that ultimately we will live or die based on philanthropy. What people give us in a given year, endowment gifts, that ultimately we will live and die based on philanthropy. And we believe that lower prices will do a couple of things. First of all, we know from experiences that lower prices creates a larger audience. And what does that mean? It means more potential donors. And if you have more potential donors, you have more potential what we call owners, sort of those super donors, the backbone of the organization. And there's another aspect of it from a business model standpoint. If you lower prices, if you're affordable, and if you have a larger audience, it enhances our case for support. The community value proposition, right? We talk a lot in this field. I've observed over 20 years, talk a lot about the value proposition with the people coming to concerts, right? But isn't there another value proposition? The value proposition for all those individuals and companies and foundations, and in some cases public entities investing in our organization. Why are they doing it? They're doing it because they believe we're delivering public value, right? They're not doing it just because we're there. They're not doing it, at least today, because they want to preserve an art form. They believe that we're adding to the public good. And so affordability in a larger audience from our perspective enhances something that's really critical to us, and I have to believe to every orchestra in the country, which is our case for support, the community value proposition. I can tell you from experience, it is really difficult to go out and talk to individuals or companies or foundations and make the case for more money when you can't point to a larger audience. And it's really hard, again, from experience, when they say, oh, but isn't this an art form mostly for the wealthy in our community? Tell me about your prices. I can also tell you that they don't really care about what our ratio of ticket sales is to contributed revenue. All they care is, are you balancing the budget? Are you solid financially? And are you serving more people? And are you accessible and trying to make yourself more accessible to the community? So the third reason within the context of the business model that we did it is we wanted to increase our case for support. Now, what have the results been? So for us, since we did it, launched this 6 years ago, our subscriber base has grown from about 5,000 subscriber households to 7,000 subscriber households. Overall attendance has grown by about 21% during that time. We have more subscriber donors, and we have a much stronger case for support. I'm absolutely confident that we're raising a lot more money today than we would be if we had not made the decision to lower prices and be able to point to that in a larger audience. We just have a much stronger case for support. And in this environment today, that stronger case for support is really, really important. It's going to continue to be really important in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So while you're thinking of your questions, I've got a couple of things to kick us off. And I'm not sure whether this is a red herring of a question, Jack, but haven't we caused some of this problem with pricing ourselves? I forget exactly what the stats are, but over the last 25 years or whatever, we have put ticket prices up by about 60% over and above the rate of inflation. We have been responsible for these high ticket prices. I don't know if that was part of your philosophy. The prices in the first place have just gone up and up and up over the last 25 years or so. And you're telling us that we should still be putting our prices up annually?
Yeah, I think we, for many years, put the prices up to cover the expenses. We didn't put it up in response to demand. We put it up in response to need.
Yep.
And I'm recommending that you really need to look at those prices to make sure that they have some relationship to demand. So that whole heat map repricing of seats, you know, if a seat is selling out at the price you're charging, that's not overpriced for that seat. If you've got a lot of seats that are wanting people in them, then those are. So you're balancing need-based pricing with now market-based pricing. And I think that's healthy.
Mm-hmm. Let me just comment on that. I mean, and there's no question that as an industry, as we've increased prices, that in fact it has had an impact on audience. I think it would be really hard not to believe that. And again, if you look at the demand, I'm open. I want to hear some really clear evidence of, not anecdotally, but overall in our industry, what are the data points that say demand is increasing? Over the last 20 years, there are some really good signs. I don't think it's out there right now. And so part of it has been pricing. It's not the only issue, but it's clearly an issue. But the higher prices have done something else. And I think this is often, as we think about pricing, we tend to think of it as a kind of a marketing issue. It's not a marketing issue. It's about how we relate to the community, it's about mission, and it's about our overall business model. Because as prices have gone up for our art form and as audiences has declined, people have started to question whether or not we're really relevant and valuable for our communities. Seen it in the corporate sector, the aggregate giving overall. I mean, there are some really disturbing signs out there. And so I think as prices have gone up, audiences has declined, our other important source of revenue, philanthropy, is compromised as a result of that.
I just also want to pick up the point. Somebody mentioned to me yesterday after the PGI research that if we're hanging everything on this hook of familiarity, we seem to be told by NEA research and all sorts of studies that we've seen is that less and less people are getting to be familiar with us at all every year. And there's a regular decline in subscription sales, 2% a year every year for the last 25 years or whatever. The NEA is forecasting another big drop in the next 7 years in their reports that they produce. How are we going to break that cycle?
Oh, I think the whole approach of familiarity is not to just accept that people are or are not familiar, but it's in fact to utilize these tools to drive familiarity, to get people. The best way to become familiar is to experience the concert more often. And whether you do it by lowering the prices across the board or lowering the point of entry prices for those that are new to it, you are in fact giving a chance for people to become more familiar. I think the difference, setting aside the philanthropy side a minute, which you cannot set aside for more than a minute, the lowering the price overall basically says everybody values the concert at the same level. Whether you've been coming for years and years and years and you used to pay $75 for that ticket, now you value it at $25. Whereas the familiarity of pricing approach to it says different people value that at different levels depending on their familiarity. Let's use price to bring them along. Then you have to make the case that you are deserving of the philanthropy, but I don't know that there's something magical about, 80% of our tickets are under $25. Is that cheap or is that expensive? Compared to a movie, that's expensive. Compared to football, that's cheap. If I said 86% of my seats are $50, is that a harder argument to make for philanthropy? Again, compared to professional sports, that's a cheap ticket compared to other things that might be more expensive. So I think, pricing right is more important than pricing low and then making the philanthropic argument.
Yeah, I would just think Jack's point's a good point. I think our view of pricing is that our success as an organization will not be how much we charge, but how little we have to charge. I mean, we've taken a real solid step on price, but we're not done. And we view it as an organization that exists for the public good, that we want to make our prices as low as possible. And I think that one of the results of higher prices is that, yes, there are some people who are willing to pay those higher prices. There's no question who value it. I think when you have across the board lower prices, the message it says to the community is that this is a community asset and it's here for everyone. And I think that something else happens with higher prices. I think that, and you cited some statistics about people being confused about whether or not we're even a nonprofit. Well, I think that's what happens with higher prices. It's not intuitive to someone who's paying $56 for a ticket that it doesn't come close to covering the cost. It's not intuitive at all. And I think that what we want to create is a large audience, passionate audience for what we do, that from the very beginning understands that we're a cause. And then our job is to appeal to their philanthropic impulses, to their sense of community, to have them contribute and invest in the organization. And I think that investment in the organization actually then reinforces along with the experience itself, coming to concerts, and it becomes a true virtuous cycle.
I'm sure a lot of people have asked you this question, and 6 years on, it's worked. But 6 years ago, there must have been an incredible amount of nervousness about doing this, a huge risk, and obviously for those first couple of years, there's less dollars coming in because you've discounted. Right. How did you do it?
Well, it was from an organizational standpoint, it was agonizing decision because there was a lot of risk and there was a lot of fear. It was 6 years ago. I think today maybe there's an even greater urgency in our field to really embrace change. I think 6 years ago it wasn't quite as urgent. So I think it was a real leap of faith. And I think really at the end of the day that we convinced our board that it was better to do something, and not just anything, but something that had been thought through, than to not do anything at all. And that what we convinced them of is all the money we were putting at risk wasn't in a lockbox somewhere, because we had declining attendance, and that we may, if we don't do anything, find ourselves in the same place from a financial of where we would be if this didn't work. Now the question of how you pay for it is a really critical question. Anytime an organization, whether it's a newspaper or any kind of company, tries to shift business models, it's very difficult to do. In our orchestra field is generally made up of organizations that are financially fragile, and so shifting models almost seems impossible to do. We were able to do it through a combination of greater volume, asking people to donate the difference, which many of them did, and by rationalizing over time our marketing expense. So as we've lowered our prices, we've also cut out of our marketing budget about $1 million during this time period by rationalizing our marketing expense. And as a result of that, even though we have less top line ticket revenue, we actually have more net revenue. And so we wouldn't have been able to do that if we had not, wouldn't have been able to afford it to do it if we had not engaged in that process of reducing marketing expense.
Okay.
John,
right.
in reducing the marketing expense, does that not diminish your reach in terms of finding new people who might be interested in serving the broader community because you have less resources to go out and communicate with people who are not on your email list, who are not in your social networks?
It's a good, that's the right question. I think what we found was that a lot of things that we were spending money on that we thought were things that were accomplishing that, newspaper ads, commercial radio, really weren't doing anything. It made us feel like we were doing something because we were spending the money, but when you really looked at it, we weren't convinced. And so, yes, we have to figure out how to reach those true new people. They're the lifeblood of our audience, of your audience. But we concluded that we were going to do it through grassroots initiatives and that we were needed to develop that competency around grassroots, which we're trying to do. So it's very important, but what we didn't want to do is to just keep spending money on something that clearly wasn't producing the results.
Okay, the St. Paul model has gone around the country. There are lots of experiments. Jack has worked with all sorts of orchestras, big and small. So over to you to ask some questions, give us some ideas. Please come to the microphones, and if you want to line up behind them, we'll get through as many as we can. And please tell us who you are.
Steve Ramsey with the Dakota Valley Symphony, the Austin Symphony of Minnesota. At the same time we were changing our business model, we changed our artistic model. Is there a relationship?
There's no direct relationship. I would say, though, and this is really kind of less about pricing and more about institutional culture, that the decision to change our artistic model, I think, helped to create the beginnings of what I would call an innovative culture that made it easier for us to make the decision on the ticket pricing. So I think it helped from that standpoint, helped to get us as an organization to become much more innovative than I think we had historically had been. So.
Any issues for you, Jack, on the artistic question? No. Danny.
My name is Danny Beckley. I'm with the Charleston Symphony Orchestra. For the Saint Paul Orchestra, how much does your case for support rest on affordable tickets?
It's an important part of our case for support. Our case for support is we every year kind of evaluate it is basically about artistic excellence, growing audiences, affordability, and financial stewardship. And I think that what sort of separates our case, differentiates it from other organizations in some cases, and certainly differentiates from what it used to be, is this affordability piece. So I think it's a really important part of our case. I think our board members, many of our board members who are very generous, I think they've stretched and given even more because of their belief in the affordability, and they're seeing the results in the concert hall. I think that with the corporate community, that there's support that would have gone away if not for the affordability. So I think for some donors, many donors, I think the affordability is the most important thing.
And I'd counter that I think that possibly the even more important metric is the size of the audience. No matter how affordable it is, if you're playing to full houses, that shows to donors, that shows to board members, that shows you're reaching the community. And if you're also bringing in more revenue while you're doing that because of those that are familiar paying higher prices, that makes your philanthropic goals easier to reach, because both of you are able to talk about, we're now playing to full houses.
I would just as an add on that, I mean, I actually think, I agree from the standpoint of what it's like to be in the hall, that the fuller halls, whether you got people there through lower prices or not, that there's a real benefit to that. But when you go out and talk to funders and they talk about the fact that, is the art form becoming less relevant, there are all these other needs in the community, they care about the affordability. To be able to say to them, and we want to do even more on price over time, to be able to say to them 56% of our tickets can be purchased for $10 is a really powerful statement that we're committed to serving more people, being relevant, and having our doors open to everyone in the community.
Thank you. Question at the back.
I'm Denise from Memphis. I have a question. How much did your average household gift increase by when you did this?
Well, there's a whole table of people from the SPCO, and I'm looking at them. From our subscriber base, it's a significant increase. We measure it since actually we look at it from FY04, and the amount of support from our subscribers has increased really significantly during that time period. It's a combination of more people. I think we have like 800 more subscriber donors than we did in FY04, and I don't know the average. Someone might know. Yeah, from the subscriber donor piece, yeah.
Just your donors that just who didn't subscribe.
Individual donors? Mm-hmm. Well, most of our individual donors have some ticket history, are part of the audience, so, or part of the past audience. I don't know the exact amount. I mean, it's pretty significant. I think since '04, our just the annual fund piece of individual giving is probably $1 million more. So it's fairly significant. I don't know the exact. I don't know, Sarah, if you know that number or not.
John, in the trajectory of that growth, was a lot of that growth in the year of the initial change when you asked people to give back a portion of it, or has that growth been pretty much steady over
I think it's been steady over time. Now the economy has having a big impact, and it sort of makes everything hard to measure. But I think basically what's happened is there was initially a lot of excitement around the accessibility and helped with our case, but I think what's really helped is the fact that it's now been around, and I think we've kind of become known for the affordability, and we can point to the larger audiences. And it's sort of a, again, we always think about how we're branded in terms of the community and selling tickets, but in terms of how we are branded from a philanthropic standpoint, I think it's really part of how funders, individual, corporate, foundation, how they think of us.
Let's take another question.
Wes Boyd, Hartford, Connecticut. Question for John, drilling down a little bit more on the philanthropic side. When you look at the $7 million contributed income, can you break it down? What percent's individual, what percent's corporate, foundation? I mean, have you seen a significant increase in corporate giving, or?
Again, we're talking about a time period covering a lot of years, and we just lived through, the worst macroeconomic situation since the Great Depression. So all of our numbers are way down. Our corporate is way down as well.
How about on a percentage basis of that $7 million?
Corporate is down as a percentage of that than if you compare it to, say, 7 years ago, because corporate support is down. I mean, our individual support over the last couple of years was down initially and has flattened out. Corporate is down pretty significantly since then. So I think it's what we can point to is, and I think probably a better question is, if you look at a lot of our corporate support today, there are some clear examples where if we had not done the move on affordability, increase the audience, that money wouldn't be there. And that's kind of how I look at it. It's probably easier than looking at the aggregate numbers.
Thank you. At the back.
Hi, Jamie Steineman with Fireland Symphony in Sandusky, Ohio, and I just wondered if you're noticing or tracking an increase in the diversity of your audience, and if you are actually implementing any programs that are going into communities that you really did not have participating in the past in terms of attendance at your concerts, not community outreach, but actual attendance at the concerts.
I would say this. I don't think that the growth in our audience that's occurred as a result of the affordability, which has been, by the way, combined with expanding our neighborhood series as well, I don't think it's produced any sort of sea change in the demographic makeup of our audience. I believe that over time that will happen. I don't think that for any orchestra just lowering prices is going to change the demographic profile. I do believe it will happen over time. I think it's a long-term, it's a generational effort. Now, I'll say this, in the last 4 years, the audience has changed in terms of we have a lot more younger people in the hall, which is really less of a pricing, and it's a little bit related to price, but we have a special program called the 2030 Club, and that's helped to bring younger people into the hall. And we have $5 kids pricing for any concert, so you can bring your kids to any concert for $5, so you have more younger families in the hall. So if you would notice a change in the demographics of our audience, if you were in the hall, what you would notice is there are just more younger people there than there were 5 years ago.
Please. Can you tell us who you are, please? Where are you from? Thank you, John.
Few of us exist in markets with two major orchestras, such as is the case here. Let me start over. Mark Hansen, Houston.
We gotcha.
Still, Houston. Mark Hansen. Few of us exist in markets with two major orchestras, such as is in place here in the Twin Cities. But we do have peer or sister arts organizations who may be pursuing different pricing strategies. John, could you please speak to any issues related to that here in the Twin Cities? My sense is that the Minnesota Orchestra is pursuing a different model from the Saint Paul Chamber Orchestra. And how do those different approaches impact some conversations that you're having with donors and ticket buyers at all levels?
If I'm understanding your question, we're not trying to, in particular, to compare and contrast our pricing strategy with any other organization in the Twin Cities.
If you're not drawing attention to the differences, I'm sure others are noticing the differences. So I'm wondering whether you've had to answer or respond to concerns from some funders who may be saying to Saint Paul Chamber Orchestra, why are you requiring the community to support SPCO more significantly through philanthropy by pursuing this lower price model?
It's good. It's a good question. I can't say that we've ever faced that particular question from a funder. I think most funders today are even more worried about the fact that we're already receiving a lot of funding, and they're asking questions about what value we're delivering to the community. Overall, I think that is really the issue, and that certainly was the issue 6 years ago. And so I think that a much greater concern, even after what we've done on pricing, I think a much greater concern is what are you doing to add more value to the community and to justify the money that you're raising every year from the community. And I continue to think that's the biggest issue. I think what funders really care about, in my experience, is I don't think they really want to get under the hood and figure out all the aspects of your business model. The question is, are you balancing your budget every year? Because if, there are a lot of orchestras even in our country that have much better ticket revenue ratios to contributed than we do that aren't balancing their budget. I think that it's no guarantee that that means that you're financially in good shape or sustainable. And I think at the end of the day, they look at it and say, are you balancing your budget? Do you have accumulated deficit? Do you have external debt? And if the answer to those questions are yes, we're balancing, no debt, no accumulated deficit, they're not that, and you're serving more people, they're not that worried about everything else.
Jack, any thoughts?
I think it's interesting that both of these approaches are effective in growing the audience over time. And that growth in the audience is probably the biggest metric on serving the community. Are you bringing the community in? Are you playing to half houses, or in fact is the community part of your audience? And then you need to, in that community, balance how much of that revenue can come from ticket sales if you're doing that, and how much of it has to come from philanthropy. And if you're in a community that doesn't have a tradition for philanthropy, it may be easier to raise it from ticket sales. If you're in a community that understands that organizations that do good for the community deserve philanthropic support, then an approach like St. Paul is using that maximizes that can be very powerful for you. I think the key is which pieces of which approaches help you grow your audience regularly and maximize your revenue between both sources.
Hi, I'm from I'm from Tallahassee, Florida, and you've been talking around this issue, but not specifically to it. Obviously, we're from a small city, and our main competitor, and this is kind of a counterpart to the question from the gentleman from Houston, our main competition is the university in town, which has 2 orchestras, and their prices are very low. So I'm wondering if my concern with us following this model is if we lower our prices, it will devalue our product. Because people can go and hear this orchestra for this low cost already. So I wonder what you think about in smaller cities where our audience may not differentiate so much between what we do and what they do, if that devaluation would hurt us ultimately. Or is that just more a marketing issue we'll have to deal with?
That I'm not suggesting to anyone that you should do anything. I'm more here to talk about what we're doing in hopes that it will stimulate your thinking and you'll come with your board and other constituents to your own conclusions. But, well, first of all, let me say this about the devaluing, because in a community like ours where you have the Saint Paul Chamber Orchestra, great chamber orchestra, and you have the Minnesota Orchestra, great symphony orchestra. This was a real concern when we made the decision. It's what a lot of people said to us, we're going to devalue the product. And in fact, I think it was really the biggest concern. And our response to that was, what really devalues the product is when the halls are empty. When there aren't people at the concert, it devalues it in a profound way. And I think that at the end of the day that won the argument. I believe that if any orchestra lowered prices and had full halls, was doing really quality concerts, good marketing, emphasizing all the things about the orchestra that speak to quality, I believe it's an issue that could be overcome. And I go back to what I said a few minutes ago. I think the most important things in terms of creating value around what we do is that there's really a strong audience for it. And I think that's both in terms of selling more tickets and in terms of philanthropy.
Yeah, when I talk to a lot of my counterparts from, sorry, that's a music term, counterpoint. When I talk to my counterparts from smaller orchestras, they are not, we're selling out our concerts. When I talk to other people from small orchestras, they're having the same experience. And I also wonder what's going to happen eventually if major cities and big orchestras take on this model. It's just ironic to me that it costs more to hear the Tallahassee Symphony than it does to hear the Saint Paul Chamber Orchestra. So I wonder how that's all going to work out in the future,
Yeah.
Please.
Karen Fishman from Music of the Baroque in Chicago. John, I wonder if in the new model you're selling more in all of your price categories, or are you selling more of the expensive seats than you used to? I mean, has there been any change in that pattern?
Do you want to answer that? I mean, the greatest demand is still, is that in the neighborhoods, for example, where it's 10 and 25 and 60%, or 10 and 40% or 25%.
At the Ordway?
What's that?
At the Ordway?
No, in the neighborhoods. I'm
Yeah.
going to start with that. The demand is much greater for $10. We've even sometimes said we should have maybe made them all $10. At the Ordway, Jessica, you can weigh in. I think probably the demand is really at $10 and 25, and
it is the least scaled that way too. I mean, we only created, let's say 25% of seats at $40. So the people who have those seats stay with those seats. And people who are used to buying, that top price again.
Okay, thank you. We have about 3 minutes left. Gentlemen, 2 sentences each to send our audience home with the things they should think about on the plane. Jack.
I just think that you have to find the situation that works for you, that allows you to fill the house and balance your revenue. And if you can fill that house charging a fair value for the price and use pricing to bring new people in and grow your audience by doing that and still meet your philanthropic needs, that works for you. If you have a community in which you really can get that support beyond the ticket price and are able to provide people with prices well below the market price, that works for you there. Find the system that works for you and your community. The growth that orchestras that have used the Familiarity Pricing have seen over 5 years, there's been double-digit growth in audiences almost every year for the ones that are doing that. It can grow them just as well as dropping it from the beginning. but it creates a different argument for philanthropy. And so it's what's the philanthropic environment in your community, I think, determines your approach.
John, last word.
This is a time in this industry in most orchestras where it's really clear that the old business model needs overhaul. So use this time to think really boldly, not about where you want to be 6 months from now or a year from now. Don't think about it in terms of can we eke a little bit more out or get a few more people. Think about where you want to be from the longer term perspective, given the trends in this industry, and those trends will ultimately impact on everyone as they always do. So I would just say use this time to be really emboldened and think of price not as a tactical marketing decision, but as a key strategic decision around how your organization is positioned in the community and a key strategic decision about how you serve the community.
Thank you all for being here, and I'm sure you'd like to thank Jack McAuliffe and Jon Limbacher.